Hi, hello, it's Nikki and welcome to my messy bookshelf. So today I am here with a tag video, which I have not done in a couple of weeks. So I am catching up on tags and I chose to do this tag first. I love tag videos, by the way. I chose to do this one first because while I love tag videos, I tend to overthink them, and that is why it takes me so long to get them out. But this one is one of the more recent ones that I've been tagged in, but I immediately knew what I wanted to talk about in this tag video. And before I get started, I have a very quick disclaimer, and that is, if you notice my glaring blue and orange attire in the last video and the next few videos, it is because my baseball team is in the playoffs, and we in this house must wear blue and orange for the next foreseeable future until we get eliminated or win. But yeah, the tag that I am doing today is the Let Me Introduce You tag. This tag was created by Melinda at A Web of Stories, and I was tagged by Pat at Book Chat with Pat. And like I said, this is one of the more recent ones I've been tagged in, but I immediately knew who I wanted to talk about in this video. So let's get into it. The first prompt is to introduce your author. Which author are you introducing? Tell us something about their life and how you came to meet them, and why did you decide to introduce them? So the author that I chose to cover first is Eleanor Hibbert. She was born Eleanor Burford, I cannot say that last name and I apologize, in 1906 in London. She was born and raised in London, and she was a well-educated young lady, and she wrote prolifically in the mid-20th century. So born and raised in London, she grew famous, wrote many books, and one of the things that I find most unique about her is that she wrote many books under different pen names. She has a ton of pen names, and I am going to talk about 3 of them today. So she was born, like I said, in 1906, and then she passed away in 1993 on a cruise ship somewhere in the Mediterranean Sea. So the next prompt, and why did I choose to introduce her is because I feel that her books are not talked about. I have never heard anyone else talk about her books. I have talked about one of her pen names before, but I never hear anyone talk about her books, and I think the quality of her historical fiction is second to none. I really haven't found many historical fiction authors who do it better than she does, especially for historical romance. The next prompt is, I'm sorry, I keep going back to prompt number 1. How did I come to meet her? So, as a young teenager growing up in New York, we lived in a small apartment. We didn't have a ton of books in the house. We had, the books that I got as a child, the little chapter books. But as far as adult books, we didn't have very many in the house. And the ones that we did have in the house were ones that my mother had gotten at the library book sale. And I saw her reading some of these, and these are the ones that she kept, and these were on the shelf for quite some time. So when I was a teenager, I picked up a book off of the shelf, and I was flipping through it, and I quickly became enthralled in what I was reading. So I read that book, and I read the next one. So I fell in love, and yeah, here we are. It is 25, about 25 years later, and here we are. I'm still loving her books. Finally, prompt number 2, what type of books does this author write? What kind of genre do they write? Or what kind of authors, or what authors are comparable to them? So she writes historical romance. And depending on which pen name that she uses, it is a different type of historical romance, because most of them are Gothic historical romance. But, and I will give you an example, under the pen name Jean Plady, she writes or I guess these are more historical fiction and not historical romance. So the Jean Plady pen name, she writes about European royalty, and I really have never found anyone else to compare to her. Like, some of her writing is brutal. Like, you feel like you are at court with these characters, these real life characters. So, for instance, we have here a book about Catherine de Medici. We have a book, Myself, My Enemy. This one is about Henrietta Maria, a Queen of England. We have a book on Charles II, and each one of the Jean Plady novels centers around a different royal character, and I have read many of them. I constantly checked these books out of the library when I was younger. Queen in Waiting we have here, and these, while these versions are out of print now, there are some that are still in print that you can find in modern paperback versions. So, for instance, this one, Mary Queen of France. So, I love these books. If you like historical fiction that is not watered down and full of inaccurate things happening in them, I love these books. So, the next pen name, and this is the one that started it all. Writing as Victoria Holt, she wrote a series of, and not a series in like a chronological series, she wrote a bunch of different Gothic romance novels as Victoria Holt. And they take place in different time periods, mostly Victorian, but there are some Edwardian ones as well. But this is the one that started it all. I picked this up off of the shelf in my house and never looked back. So I have read this one, I can't even count how many times. She is on the same level as Agatha Christie for me as far as how many times I have reread her books. They are so comforting to me, but this is the one that started it all. This is a Gothic romance centered around a governess, and it takes place in England and in France during the time of the French Revolution. So, love this one. This is one that centers around the East India Company, the India Fan, and another one that I have read countless times. And again, you can find still, sometimes, modern reprintings of her works if you look hard enough. So I highly recommend, if you love historical fiction or Gothic romance, to pick one of these up at some point. And then the other pen name that I will talk about is Philippa Carr. And the Philippa Carr novels are also historical romance, kind of with a Gothic element. But her Philippa Carr novels are a series. This series centers around a family. So we have, each book centers around a different woman in the family from the Tudor period, around the time of Henry VIII, dissolving the monasteries, all the way up until World War II. And the novels are basically a diary of each woman in the family that they cover, talking about what's going on historically, but as well as the romance. And these are not necessarily always happy endings the way some of the other ones are, but they are fascinating, and it is so fascinating to see how they interconnect, because it is the descendants of that first woman writing diaries. So I found them fascinating. I read them all, and I think there's 17 books in this series. So that is my recommendation for Eleanor Hibbert. And then prompt number 3, where should a new reader start with their books? I think it depends on what type of books that you are looking for. If you love family sagas, I would recommend that you start with the first book in this series. And this is not the first one, I do not have it, but if you look up Philippa Carr, you will find that series of 17 books, and the first one was excellent. If you like gothic romance that is clean, I would recommend you start where I did, with The Devil on Horseback. Love this book to this day. If you like just historical fiction that is not romance, I would recommend you start with something a little bit shorter, like Myself, My Enemy by Jean Plady. And this one follows the life of Henrietta Maria, who married Charles I in England, and it goes throughout her life all the way until she was married and became Queen of England, and her husband's execution. So, love these. And if you are a fan of Catherine de Medici, I know there's a show about her. This one is a little bit long, but I think it's actually 3 different novels, a trilogy in this one chunky book here. But this was excellent as well. So that is where I suggest that you start, with Eleanor Hibbert. And then the last prompt is to tag some people. So I have seen a few people do this one. I think I am going to tag Literary Layer, and I am going to tag a new booktuber, Amanda Should Be Reading. I would be interested to hear what she has to say or who she would introduce. But I thank you so much if you've made it to the end of this video. Thank you for listening to me ramble about an author that I think does not get enough love. And I hope to see you in the next one. Bye.